Uh, Mr. Chukuka, are you there? I can see one person is on, but I'm not too sure if it's you. Because I know Bitrina has joined, so has Karen, so has Pamida, and also Vakar is there. We're just waiting for Leo to join. Start. We'll start. Good afternoon from Bangalore, everyone. I know it's good morning to many of y'all. Good afternoon, good evening, whichever zone y'all are from. First of all, thank you so much from the Public Affairs Center, from all of us here, to be panelists, observers, and definitely the participants. This virtual webinar is being recorded. At the end of the webinar, we'll be bringing out two products. One is a report and one is a video. We will also be tweeting it on all our social media platforms. So we will be happy that if you want to retweet, we will be, especially the resource persons and participants and audience who have joined us from outside India, Bangalore, and other organizations, please go ahead and retweet it. So welcome once again to the virtual webinar on reducing development inequalities through South-South cooperation for a sustainable future in the post-COVID arena. I now hand over the platform literally to my colleague.
Hi, I'm sorry, there is no sound. We are not able to hear Meena.
Yes, I can't hear. I don't know about others.
Yes, I also can't hear. I was thinking that whether something is wrong with me or not. Now it seems everyone can't hear.
We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Meena will just get on for us just in a second. Just sorry. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, we can
Hear you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, this small glitch, it was working, but I don't know suddenly. Meena, would you like to shift to my computer? Sorry, Meena will use my comp. Sorry about that. Yeah, Meena's using my comp. Sorry about that. Come.
I'm so sorry that for that technical glitch. So, which I think emphasizes the need definitely for better South-South cooperation among countries. So, I think we should hopefully take this on a positive note. So, just to reintroduce what I was, kind of talking about. So thank you once again for participating in this webinar, which presents an important aspect of cooperation between countries to reduce development inequalities through platforms such as the UN Office of South-South Cooperation that spans countries of the Global South. Very quickly to share a brief background to this virtual webinar. So the UNSSC had put out a call on themes under South-South Ideas, and Public Affairs Center, or PAC as we call ourselves, was selected to prepare and present a paper on advancing alternative development paradigms under South-South cooperation, taking up a case study on India's Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation, or the ITEC program. So this development cooperation program was instituted in 1964 by the government of India with the idea to share development lessons that the country itself was imbibing. The idea was to develop relations with other developing countries on the basis of partnership and cooperation for mutual benefit. This paper that we worked on assessed the usefulness of this program in the context of Global South progress and South-South cooperation. So referring to the ITEC program that we carried out with our neighboring countries, Nepal and Bangladesh, we arrived at a framework for assessment, and we concluded that there is a need to align such programs to the development needs of our partner or recipient countries to meet with their national objectives and their SDG targets. So in that context, we thought of placing this paper in terms of addressing development inequalities among countries of the Global South, in the aftermath of COVID-19, that has actually, set back development trajectories of our countries by many years. And the role that such programs, such development cooperation programs can play in mutualizing risks and benefits. So we have in this virtual webinar a panel discussion by 4 very distinguished panelists, and we also have two very distinguished observers who would bring together the points expressed by the panelists together to present a framework at the end. So I'm proud to introduce our 4 distinguished panelists. So we have with us Dr. Bitrina Diamet. She is Executive Director at Science, Technology and Innovation Policy Research Organization, Tanzania, that carries out policy-oriented research in science, technology and innovation. She has completed her PhD in Development Studies from the University of Dar es Salaam and was also the coordinator of social sciences research in Tanzania Commission for Science and Technology. Bitrina, glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Waqar Ahmed is the Deputy Executive Director at Sustainable Development Policy Institute, Pakistan. Earlier he has served in UNDP as advisor and has undertaken assignments with Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and the Ministries of Finance, Planning and Commerce in Pakistan. Welcome, Waqar, to this panel discussion. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Karine Fernando is a senior research professional at the Center for Poverty Analysis, SEPA, Sri Lanka. Her work revolves around designing and managing research and policy interventions around the topic of sustainable development, exploring the root causes, the scientific, socio-economic and institutional processes and interlinkages that need to be understood to deal with the environment and poverty nexus. Karine, thank you for joining us as a panelist. Finally, Dr. Fahmida Khatun Executive Director at the Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD, Bangladesh. She did her postdoctoral research at the Earth Institute, Columbia University, US. She has worked as a research fellow at the BIDS, as an environment specialist for the UNDP, and as an economist for the USAID mission in Bangladesh. Welcome, Fahmida, to the panel, to this panel discussion. We have two distinguished observers, Dr. Chukwuka Onyekwana, Executive Director at Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa. He has a degree in MSc Economics from the University of Kent and has completed his PhD in Economics from the University of Portsmouth, UK. Welcome, Dr. Chukwuka. We have also Mr. Leandro Echt. He's a consultant, evaluator, and researcher in international development, Florida. He's a political scientist with over 15 years of experience in international development and public policy, supporting the use of evidence in decision-making and facilitating multi-stakeholder processes with a focus on gender and equity. So that completes my introduction to the panelists and the observers. As part of this panel discussion, we had put forth two guiding questions that would lead to responses from our panelists. So we'll take up one question at a time. We have about 5 minutes per panelist per question, after which I will invite the observers to respond to the points raised by the panelists and then bring together the responses to each of these two questions to be able to hopefully arrive at an operative framework. So can we start with you, Bitrina?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's afternoon here in Dar es Salaam. I've already been introduced, so I will just move straight to the subject matter.
Right.
Yeah, yes,
So
yes.
Shall I put forth my question?
Hello?
Yes. So my first guiding question is, post-COVID-19, what are the challenges that your country or region faces in building back better? So do international capacity building programs help in this? So we can start with you, Bitrina.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, talking about meaning the building back better. You know, I've been thinking
building
about
back
this
better.
concept. Yes, I've been thinking and reading about this concept, but really, when it relates to poor developing countries or least developed countries, I really fail to understand because you know what are they building back, for instance?
Yes.
Yes, what do they have to build back? Because of course, I'm not saying that these countries have not been affected by COVID-19. They have been affected very much, of course, in terms of, especially for those that had total lockdown, international trade, sectors such as tourism were very much affected, even in least developed countries. But what I'm talking about, I'm referring to here is actually through path towards development. When we talk about development, you'll find that these countries, most of these countries, you know, even before COVID, they were in extreme poverty. About 35%, these are statistics from 2018, about 35% of people in this country were in extreme poverty. And when you even look at their development path, these countries were nowhere close to development path. I mean, so to speak, because if you look at the production and their exports, they really rely on commodities, you know, which are low knowledge intensive and not employment generating. And for Africa, actually 75%, you know, of these countries, yeah, of least developed countries in Africa, they are actually, that is where they base their production. And generally for least developed countries, they have, I think, about just 1% of their production and their export is only 1% on knowledge kind of knowledge intensive exports things from, for instance, from the manufacturing. While we know that for countries that have, I believe these are the countries that at least they are on the right path, like Malaysia. Manufacturing was 39% of their export. And we all know that. This is the fact that we know. When you look at the indicators, social and economic indicators of development, you find that there is correlation between the positive indicators and the export of knowledge-intensive products. So what I'm saying is that when we are talking about building back better, these countries were doing very bad even before COVID. So what I'm saying is that when we talk about building better, this is how I would define these countries actually should mean the building back better should mean what do they learn from the experiences of COVID? For me, it is the lessons that will help these countries to put their development path on their right track. There are many lessons. I can point out 2 lessons. For instance, we all know that during the pandemic, when it was at its peak, every country or every region was on their own. We are saying that this is the time to collaborate, but it was the time countries were on their own. We remember of the banning of export of essential goods and medicines, because people were putting their people first. And look at the research. There are countries that are used to, like countries in Africa. Basically, we receive research money from rich countries. But this amount, it was reduced because countries were actually focusing on supporting research for their own countries to generate evidence to how to counter the COVID. So the lesson here is that it's not good to be dependent, especially when it is it is during the global pandemic such as the COVID-19. Countries need to learn to be self-reliant. This is one lesson that countries that depend on others, like the least developed country, they have to be self-reliant. They have to be to actually support their own knowledge production. They need to have they need to have money, because even when we are talking about building back, addressing, you need money to do that, but that needs to be done quickly. And if you are waiting for money from somebody, how can you do that quickly? So I think this is one of very important lessons for these countries to learn, that they have to be self-reliant. And another lesson for Africa is what I learned, and especially what was happening in Tanzania, for instance, and I think elsewhere in Africa, is that Africa is actually very, very creative. A lot of potential for innovation, because we witnessed a lot of novel products, emerging to address the impact of COVID-19. And I think Africa was not that much affected in terms of death. I think partly because we have this local kind of, because we were using them in Tanzania. So basically what I'm saying is that to building back, these countries need to build their economies. They need to be self-reliant, and they can do that through building capabilities in science, technology, and innovation, and coming out with the collaboration between South. And I think this can best be done by collaborating between South rather than North. I'm not saying that North-South collaboration is not bad, but I think I'm reading from literature that it's far better. It has positive impact, collaboration between the South countries. They need to collaborate in terms of areas like trade, like foreign direct investment, like for instance, even policy learning, STI policy learning. How the southern countries that are a bit higher, in terms of development, what did they do? What were the policies they implement to be where they are? We can learn from ourselves, because South countries are closer to each other in terms of culture, in terms of socioeconomic, and therefore this
Yes,
is what
yes.
I'm saying.
Yes. Thank you, Vitrina. I think we need to stop there. We'll go on to our next panelist. Waka, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think,
Waka, are you muted?
yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I think probably others can hear me. I hope so.
We can hear you. Yes.
We
Great.
can hear you.
Okay, great. So I think let me start by
Waka,
seconding.
we are not able to hear you. No, you're audible.
So we can hear him.
We can hear
very well.
you. Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Yes, Waka, sorry.
Great. Thank you. So let me just take lead from what Vitrina rightly said. And I think for many of our countries, building back better was about putting the SDGs back on track, or at least thinking about how to put the Sustainable Development Goals back on track. And if there was a role that South-South or the triangular cooperation could play in this regard. I
Yes.
think on this pursuit, at least once the economies were coming out of the immediate impact of COVID, the
Yes.
priority really was to spend on the poor and bringing back the livelihoods which had been hurt by the impacts of lockdowns, for example, and particularly paying attention to those sustainable development goals which had been worst hit, basically. This pursuit, if I may say, faced two immediate, I would say, hurdles. One was, of course, the fiscal constraint. Almost all of the budgets in the southern economies have faced a deep fiscal constraint. And of course, due to the commodity super cycle, which has given rise to unprecedented inflation, this fiscal crisis is deepening in most southern countries. And of course, while of course the way governments had designed the response, the first set of the response was with regards to costs of adapting to the shock. And then the other was to then support the economies to remain out of the shock stage and then move towards a more steady state path going forward.
Right.
Now, of course, that steady state path required both public as well as private investment.
Right.
And of course, bringing back public investment was a little harder because budgets were already overstretched during the COVID period. So it was the private investment which was being expected to supplement the government budgets and bring back economic growth in most of the countries which were opening up. But this pursuit of the private sector, to a large part, has been met by constraints on the trade balance side, where protectionist policies of the North, if I may say, and of course some southern countries as well, have not only led to, of course, what we saw in the first and second wave of COVID, which was the supply chain disruptions, but also shortages of raw material and intermediate goods, which haven't allowed the industry or even processed agriculture to come back to the normal ways of working where they used to work. And that trickle down is, of course, seen in some services sectors. That knock-on effect is seen in some services sectors as well.
Right.
Now, this, of course, is also this current account or pressures on the current account are further they become acute due to the pressures on the southern currencies. And we have lately seen that not only the currencies in the South, but also even in the developed world have been facing a lot of beating due to not only the US dollar's own appreciation, but the oil prices and the volatility seen in the energy markets, which are large part of our trade balance. And that has certainly put the entire sort of a projected demand which these southern countries had with regards to, let's say, import of infrastructure related needs, import of food related needs, imports of other aspects such as a cheaper fuel, which may have allowed us to come back to the pre-COVID normal. You know, that is not happening. And now, of course, with the exchange rate depreciating very quickly for most of the southern countries, even the essential import from abroad is becoming quite a challenge. And many of the countries in the south have already resorted to the support from the International Monetary Fund, which, by the way, will be coming with their own set of conditionalities to bring back macroeconomic stability in these countries. So I think just to close my response to the first question, I think what is need of the hour and where South-South cooperation could help, first is, of course, the immediate need to sustain the social protection. Particularly, we thought that most of the social protection which had been designed or put in place for COVID will go away quickly, subsidies will be rolled back, but we are now seeing that due to the pressures of commodity super cycle and the unprecedented inflation, it may not be the governments, and there's so much political pressure on them, they may not be able to roll back the subsidies as we had thought. And this is where more South-South and triangular discourse is required, and we need to learn from each other how countries are coping up with this.
True. Thank you so much, Waqar. Karen, can we? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Karen, we can hear you.
All right. Good day, everyone. It's nice to be here. So let me also try and give a different spin also on this. I mean, the short answer to whether international capacity building programs is actually needed. Really, after COVID, it has become more imperative that we actually learn while things are happening to us, as long as to learn how to face the future. So in a way, I think what is kind of interesting about being in a South-South cooperation in that kind of frame is that there are similar challenges, although there might be cultural, I mean, there are cultural similarities, but also differences. So we know the regions are complex, but the challenge of COVID is really playing out for us. You know, it's real time. So there is a lot that can be learned by sharing, by learning, by seeing what other countries are doing and seeing whether there is a way to kind of replicate the same thing, learn about it. And if those resources are actually available to South-South cooperation, where the conditions are similar, then they should also be more accessible and available to people. So that, in a sense, would be one of the benefits of South-South cooperation right now. In terms of building back better, my colleagues have, both Bitrina and Waqar have talked about the economic imperatives and really the backsliding that has happened in the region. Unfortunately, for the people who are facing these challenges, we also know that they are quite reliant on natural resources. So the challenges that existed in terms of like climate change, about use of water, all of those are still also there. And actually, if you look back at the kind of cooperation that has tried to take place in the environmental sector, actually some of this has a bit of a history, because by nature, natural resources are shared and they are transboundary. So there have been attempts to really try and manage it. And so South-South corporations have actually played a big role in it. And if you look at the focus, a lot of it has been on technology transfer, on capacity and awareness. And actually there is a much greater role now that these types of measures can play. In South Asia, actually, there is this I suppose like SAC, the environmental SAC, that is called the South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, and this is exactly what they have been trying to do since the 80s, actually.
Right.
So there is like unlike a one-time short program. So I guess similar in a way to the training facility that you looked at in PAC.
Right.
This is a much more wide program. It actually looks at multilateral conventions and how well countries are doing.
Right.
So there has been like this awareness and capacity building realm that is there. And one of the good things about it is that it's long term. So now the challenge even for those types of groups is how do you now deal with the other burdens that COVID has brought along.
Right.
Interestingly, in agriculture, what we see is that there have been more hands-on partnerships. So there have been countries supporting technical transfers. So training is not so much formal, but also hands-on. And there is a range of techniques now that can also be useful, and these can also be adapted. So there are these opportunities also that can be created there. The downside, I suppose, to this type of things is that doing only capacity building or awareness is not really may not give us the development impacts that we want,
Right.
because there isn't very good follow-up and monitoring. This is also raised in the PAC report.
Right.
So if you really want it to go the distance, having an implementation program is also necessary, and some sort of way of, and the evaluations right now don't really capture rigorously what is really taking place in terms of a development impact.
Right.
So we also need to ask whether just by having a cooperation, just by having this kind of a transfer capacity, does really lead to cooperation? Does it lead
Right.
to commitment within the
Right.
South-South
Right.
countries?
Right.
And this is
Yes.
something that is also kind of, we all know it comes with the background of the baggage with political and
True. True.
the other types of things. So it's not always that having just the capacity
True.
will really lead to good commitment. But
Right.
there are ways in which some of them have managed to do that. So I'll stop there, because I
Yes.
think in your next questions we
Right.
can look at
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you,
responses.
Karen. Famida, you have the
Thank you
floor.
very much. Thank you, Dr. Meena. And thank you, Dr. Annapurna, also, and PAC for organizing this and for inviting me to speak at this very distinguished panel. I'm really honored and humbled also that the three speakers before me, they have already laid out the scenario with regard to the issues you have posed in front of us. So
Right.
a large part of it maybe I might be repeating, but the fact is that these are the issues of the southern countries. So we'll have to tell again and again the story behind this challenges which has been posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So the
Right.
issue you have, the title of this session, the inequality issue. In fact, inequality was always there during
Right.
COVID period. Also, it was a big phenomena, though the world had progressed in terms of its economic growth through higher trade, through higher business, and progress in technological areas and all. Despite that, the a large number of people were still below poverty level, and
Right.
many and a large chunk was actually actually within the southern countries. So this large chunk which is situated in the southern countries, their plight during the during the COVID and post-COVID period actually has deteriorated, and as a result, many of the achievements of these SDGs are apprehended to be reversed. So
Right.
the challenges you are asking us to portray, that the challenges during post-COVID period, I think the challenges are, as I have mentioned, that which were before that those have been worsened. I would like to
Correct.
mention here 6 specific challenges which has been highlighted, but I would like to emphasize on those. First one is that these countries in the southern part of the world, they have resource constraint, first of all, and there's
Right.
very limited fiscal space. As a result,
Right.
when crisis like this pandemic comes, then how to address and how to feed people, that becomes the real challenge. That's why during COVID we have seen that the size of the stimulus packages has been so different across the world. The
Right.
poor countries could not manage as much as the developed country. This is one. I'll quickly go. The second one, of course, this was a health crisis, and we have seen that the lack of a robust health system has been
Right.
so visible during that
Right.
crisis. The third one is
Yes.
that, of course, there is this coherence among various policies, the fiscal policy, monetary policy, and trade policy. If I have time, I would explain. I can explain, but I think there's not much time. But
Right.
during this time, policymakers juggle around these because each policy has its own implications and impact, but then a coherence is really needed. The fourth one, I would mention that the importance of institutional reform, governance, all these were very, very important, because whatever resources have been allocated, the utilization of these resources and access of those resources by the people who are left behind, that has
Right.
also been very, very, very critical. The fifth one is, of course, the climate change. This has been a perennial problem, and if we cannot address these challenges, this will only multiply the other challenges. So that's why this is all true for all time. Then
Correct.
finally, the issue of technology, which has been also highlighted, access to technology. In case of technology, technology is there, technological revolution is happening, but access to technology is so important, which has been very prominent. The
Yes.
differentiation or the inequality of access to technology has really had a very, very severe impact on health, on education. So
True.
that will actually apprehended to, that it is apprehended that is going to also have an impact on inequality of education and inequality of income in the future. So the
Right.
international capacity building has a lot to do. Through capacity building, we can, of course, not only share our knowledge, but also help. Nowadays we are talking about, the whole theme of this discussion is that how southern countries, how south cooperation
Yes,
can
work
help
together.
us overcome this. So I would stop here. We can
Right.
have a discussion later on.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fahmida. So we have various points that have been put together, put forth for our observers. Dr. Chukwuka, welcome. Welcome to this session. We haven't met earlier. I'm Dr. Meena Nair from Public Affairs Center. I'm head of research here. So as the first observer of this panel discussion, where the panelists have addressed or have tried to respond to the question on post-COVID-19, what are the challenges that your country or region faces in building back better? Do international capacity building programs help? So we have had panelists from Tanzania, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh responding to this. What would you how would you like to respond or bring together the points that these panelists have put forth? Dr. Chukwuka, would you like to start? Hello. Dr. Chukwuka, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, please.
Good morning, everyone from Nigeria. Yeah.
Right.
Apologies, I joined quite late. Yes, but I managed to listen to Carrie and Famida, and
Right,
I'll just comment on and reflect on some of the points that I mentioned. Karen has mentioned the need for effective international capacity building programs, and Famida also reflected on that while mentioning the issues around inequality, resource constraints, and also the need for institutional reforms and governance, and how international capacity building could help through international capacity building through the South-South cooperation could help to tackle these
right,
challenges. So in essence, we see that COVID-19 pandemic has worsened a lot of the human development indicators within the Southern
right,
Hemisphere. It has worsened poverty, unemployment, um, as well as other key, public finances. Uh, but I would like to mention the need for international capacity building and technical capacity cooperation in certain areas. One is managing public finances. This has been reflected by the
right,
panelists. A lot of countries in the South are in debt. There is need to explore different ways of increasing revenue, particularly the resource-dependent countries. They need to diversify their resources, manage debt in a better way, and because the pandemic hit a lot of these countries when there was limited fiscal space as well as rising debt.
right,
So it was important that they reflected on the need for international capacity building, and profounded better ways of managing public finances.
okay,
Also, the cost of living crisis being witnessed, there is need for international cooperation to explore non-conventional ways of managing inflation, and also um, trying to look at the structural factors that lead to rising prices and how to tackle them. But overall, I think there's a need for international cooperation in building resilience to shocks in
right,
general.
right.
And I think the South-South cooperation,
Mhm. Hello, hello, hello. Dr. Chukuka, are you there?
His lines, I think his line is dropped.
Okay, okay. Yes, I don't see him. I think maybe we'll just move on to our next observer. Come back to Dr. Chukuka when he comes back. So, Leandro, Ms. Leandro, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I'm very sorry I'm not able to set my camera now. I will see if I can do it for later intervention. But
Yes.
well, I'm sorry about Chuka. I hope he will come back. But in the meantime, well, thanks to all the panelists for their interventions. So far, I have maybe a few reactions.
Okay.
One has to do with what Vitrina shared about this tension between expanding collaboration and mutual support in times of global crisis, but at the same time, the trend or the need for countries to prioritize their own population or the solutions, the internal solutions to problems that are similar across the globe, but at the same time are very contextualized. And And I think the pandemic put that in the picture, that everybody was talking about the need for collaboration and how we address this as a in collaboration among countries, but also it put in evidence that the need for countries to be self-reliant and not depend on others. A second point that I want to share maybe has to do with what Carl was mentioning is the pandemic also put in evidence the central role of the state. Many times diminished or attacked, but in this global crisis, it played a central role, as Bakar said, both in mitigating the impact, but also in supporting especially the most vulnerable groups of the society. Of course, that has, it was also very important and critical, the role of the private sector as well, especially in developing solutions in terms of using their knowledge capacity and resources, but the role of the state has been critical.
Right.
And maybe one comment about Karin's intervention has to do with the need for learning in these situations and generate real-time evidence and sharing among countries. But at the same time, Karin was emphasizing the importance of planning and having an implementation plan. But I also believe that the pandemic showed us at the large case, but also in each of our own practices, that planning sometimes can be very much effective for the situations, and there is need to also perform with certain levels of adaptation and flexibility. And it has been very challenging for the states of southern countries, I think. But again, I think that there's a lesson there to continue exploring about how to learn in an adaptive way in this type of situation. And finally, and maybe this is a comment more from the study, but also from the reflections that we are sharing, has to do with South-South cooperation is critical for the global South, but it made me reflect also that even between South-South cooperation, we need to pay attention to power relations.
Yes.
We always talk about power relations between northern countries and southern countries and how we can mitigate that and work around that. But it also happen, and the study also show it very well, that there can be also power relationships between neighbors, between those countries that have more resources, have more capacity, and also impose their conditions to the to other neighbors with less resources and less capacity to manage their own decisions. So thank you so much, and I will come back later.
Right. Thank you, Leandro. Good to see you back, Chukuka. I think we'll just go on to the next question, and then maybe you could finish what you were going to raise for the last question and also for the next one. Would that be okay with you, Chukuka? Right. So basically, we will go back to the panel. And my second question relates to how can we strengthen sharing of knowledge and mutualization of risks to face future challenges like the recent pandemic or any other crisis together as countries of the global South. So I'll go back to the same way we went around for the first round. Vitrina, can we start with you?
Yeah, thank you very much. Regarding knowledge sharing, actually, this is something that is extremely important because we need to learn from each other. And when knowledge is shared, actually it multiplies. So knowledge must be shared. Regarding issues of the strategies for sharing knowledge, I'm not sure whether we have a problem there because I think right now there are different strategies for knowledge sharing. For instance, for literary work, there is it's increasingly open sources, and you find platforms for knowledge sharing. There are all sorts of strategies for knowledge sharing. I think a lot of knowledge is increasingly being shared. My little worry about knowledge sharing is inequity in knowledge production, because to be useful, it has to be, there has to be equity. Otherwise, then the knowledge sharing won't be that much useful.
Right.
And yes, when I talk about inequity in knowledge sharing, I'm talking about who has a better chance to produce knowledge.
Right.
Much of the yes, who has a better chance? Much of the knowledge is produced in the northern. Yes, whose knowledge matters, whose knowledge we respect. Again, we go back to the northern researchers. And when you talk about who determines the priority for knowledge production, it is still the north. So everything about knowledge is revolved around the north. Because even the knowledge that is being produced by the southern researchers is basically actually decided by the north, because they are the ones who fund, they are the ones who determine what areas to be, what are the priority areas, how it should be done, even the methodologies. So it's a problem, because if there is that inequality, and then you share, of course, if you share something that is inappropriate, you won't be really helpful. So what I am talking about is how can we make, what is the role of the southern collaboration in knowledge sharing?
Right.
Yes, can it help? Will the southern collaboration help? I have been reading about that, and I think there is a gray area there, and I think we need to do a bit of research there. Because we have learned, I have read about economic, supporting each other economically. South-South cooperation actually helps. There's statistics on that. But in addressing inequity in knowledge systems, I'm not very sure. There is no statistics. So we need a bit of research there. But yes, I could propose things like, for instance, pooling resources together.
Okay.
Having centers of excellence, I think that is already happening. I think that is very important. I think we have to do more of that. For instance, South center, such and such center of excellence in any area. There could be regional centers of excellence, and I think that can help. And yeah, basically, I really have very little to say about that. But what I'm saying is that we have to, that knowledge sharing, we should not just talk about knowledge sharing. Knowledge sharing will be useful only when there is equity in knowledge system. And this equity, actually, it can be at the level of an organization. You know your own organization, you know whether there is equity, who gets resources in terms of gender, in terms of seniority, and so who is there equity at the level of countries. We know which universities are normally given more money than the others, which research centers get more money. There is equity at all levels. There is an international inequity. I've just described that. There's a big inequity. And when we are talking about, when we are talking about equity and leaving no one behind at the international level, we are talking about inequity at the international level. And I've already said that right now, I think we all agree that there is an equity in knowledge system, and that even if you share that knowledge, it won't be that much helpful. Because if you are doing a research which has been funded by somebody from the north, somebody who has identified the priority areas of research, then even if you produce, even if you share with your colleagues, it won't be helpful. So I'm emphasizing addressing the inequity and what would be the role of the South-South cooperation in addressing the knowledge inequity. Thank you.
Thank you, Betrina. That was a very interesting perspective of pooling of knowledge resources together. Waqar, how would you like to respond to this question?
Thank you very much, and I think a very important question going forward, because of course, if there's one thing that COVID has taught us, that is really that no one has a monopoly over knowledge. And this is where I think we have to exercise a lot of humility and come together and probably also accept that the knowledge partnerships and the knowledge networks that we had, even they were deficient in pulling together the real-time knowledge which was really required in times of COVID. But of course, there's learning in this process. And in disaster situations, the best lessons that are learned are in those times. Now, as I see it, and I'll just make 3 or 4 quick points. While, of course, in the academia, of course, we do continue to have research collaborations and South-South academic partnerships as well. But one of the weakest link in knowledge partnerships is the government-to-government learning, or what every government, for example, in the health space or in the social protection space or in disaster risk reduction space can learn from the other government. This is what we have to highlight, that Southern governments have a lot to learn from each other. Second is the role of regional forums. So I'm particularly talking about the forums in, for example, SCO, ASEAN, SAARC, ECO. I think one of the key reasons why these forums had come into being was actually to pool knowledge and then move forward with a unified development agenda and to assist each other so that we can pull each other up as a region. And I'm sure that my colleague Chuka will have examples of regional cooperation forums from Africa as well. So that is my second point. We really need to look into how to innovate these regional forums in the South going forward. Third point is that when we talk about knowledge partnerships, most of them are built around some sort of a thematic focus. So it's really important that who sets an agenda or who sets that thematic focus. While, of course, UN bodies have tried to do a very, they've contributed to this. Most of the efforts that we see in South-South knowledge collaborations were UN-led. But of course, therein again, one needs to see that is it the funders who are setting the agenda? Is it a mix of funders and those who are going to be sort of exercising these outcomes of knowledge partnerships, for example? Or is it actually the South who is actually passing through those problems, who gets to lead the agenda and the narrative when it comes to a thematic focus of knowledge partnerships? And then finally, I think it is important that it is important to highlight the role of think tanks like PAC and others who are participating over here. These think tanks have a much bigger responsibility when we talk about knowledge partnerships, which are focused on addressing aspects such as the post-pandemic revival or putting SDGs back on track, because it's these think tanks which have the nimbleness to actually be knowledge brokers for the government, between government and academia, between government and private sector. It's this knowledge brokering role which think tanks like PAC and others will have to play going forward.
Response to this question. Kelly, would you like to go next?
Sure. I have to say I endorse the idea of that Waqar just talked about in terms of, much greater knowledge partnerships and the role that we all can play actually, Trina mentioned the issue about having more indigenous knowledge, your own knowledge, and yes, that is important, but it's also really important that that knowledge is shared, and these partnerships do exist, and people who are able to then do things with it, get more mobilization, get more, bang for your buck, so to say. That kind of thing really does need to happen. There was also a point raised about who gets exposure to this, and we know that the South-South cooperation, some of the more formal capacity building programs do really reach out to government. And with government, bureaucracies are so big. Sri Lanka is a tiny country with a massive bureaucracy. So in the end, you train or you pass on that knowledge to really so few people. So if you really needed to make a wider impact, then actually using all those other open sources, making sure actually the kinds of programs are also available online, also available in the languages that are required. Those also should be responsibilities within these types of corporations. I also feel that if you look at how useful that information is, just having the knowledge is really not going to turn into a development impact. So is there a way to actually push for programs that are not, where the capacity building component is an inbuilt component? It's not a separate component, but it's actually one that's vested in a project, a design. So there's actually some sort of a learning that can be tried out based on the capacity or knowledge that people have gained. So then there is a greater chance also for the information to actually become more useful. If you take also the types of learning that is happening, that, if it is subject-based, lots of our issues we will find is not really only technical capacity, but there is also necessity to link those technical capacities with the other kinds of dynamics. So for like most of the different things we deal with, whether it be natural resources or even something like education, because there are so many institutions with vested interests, because there are lots of different layers, it's also quite important that these programs think about conflict resolution. And it is actually part and parcel also of trying to maybe build better cooperation, because we know that the technical capacity is just not enough.
Right.
If you just take the fisheries example, there are treaties, transboundary treaties, that is supposed to work on trying to manage your resources better, trying to deal with the poverty dimension as well as the environmental dimension. But, the politics takes away from what the initiative can do.
True.
So just having the capacity or the awareness or even the treaty is not enough if we don't also have mechanisms that help people solve their problems. And really, it's part and parcel of this. Our regions are strife with political and skewed benefits.
Right.
So I think this is also what is quite different in a South-South relationship. There is politics also in North-South, but there is a lot more kind of in-your-face political or because both sides are supposed to gain. They're supposed to be these mutual benefits, and the
Right.
benefits tend to be quite skewed. So having to deal with those kinds of issues are really some of the practical problems, but they do need to be dealt with.
Taken.
Yeah, so I'll stop there. And
Right.
also that, again, if we want to know whether there is better benefits, then we do need better systems to monitor. The problem with much more with capacity building or awareness, these intangible outputs, is that we are really not putting in the effort to try and see what has happened to them. So even if you do train, we don't really know what's happening with the training. So is that really useful?
Yeah.
So having a little bit more of a M&E, making sure trainings get that feedback is also important to ensure that they are more effective.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Yes, Dr. Fahmida.
Thank you, Dr. Meena. First of all, so echoing the other speakers, I would also like to emphasize the need and importance of knowledge. I feel that knowledge is a driver of progress, but on the other hand, knowledge can also create inequity. So with that regard, I would like to mention 4 areas which can act as a bottleneck, but also these are the areas where we need to work on. First of all, knowledge generation. So within these countries, we have to generate our knowledge, what is relevant domestically and also internationally. So you often find barriers in terms of the state of the art knowledge and education and all these. So while doing so, many of our students go abroad, but there are different types of barriers. First of all, it is expensive, and there is also the issue of visa, and all these are barriers. So we'll have to also work together so that we can generate world-class knowledge within our region. Secondly, then after the knowledge, how do we use it? Utilization of this knowledge amongst ourselves. Of course, when we send our students or young people go for higher studies, many don't come back. So we are being deprived of those, but that's a natural process. There's nothing to harp on that. That is the trend, and that's very normal. So if we can generate knowledge, if we have infrastructure within our own regions, then we can have, we can scale up. So then we will have adequate number of people, young population, or people with adequate, appropriate knowledge. So that is the second issue. The third issue is that the recognition or the acceptance, the knowledge which we acquire, quite often it is not recognized by many countries. So that we will have to give world-class knowledge, and we will also work towards raising our voice to accept that, recognize this knowledge. And fourthly is sharing that knowledge. That knowledge has to be shared, as we are emphasizing on that how we are sharing. And during these types of crises, sharing of knowledge has become so important. That has given, COVID has given us that insight. Now, with the sharing issue, I would like to expand a little bit, because the knowledge partnership issue has been mentioned. So in case of knowledge partnership, the other issue is that we can also in this region can build centers of excellence. There are some, in many countries, there are centers of excellence. For example, India is quite famous for, IIT, Indian Institute of Technologies, which are really equivalent to any of the world-class, technological, or computer science institutions. So those types of centers of excellence can be built in some, and then exchange of students and all. So we have seen, so knowledge sharing can happen, our partnership is happening firstly at the think tank level. There is also to some extent at the educational institutions level. There is little, not much, as Dr. Vakar has mentioned, that government to government, we have to also increase that. And then the partnership also among the private sector, because it is the private sector's money, because government doesn't have enough money. And for example, in the Western countries, particularly in the USA, you have seen all the most of the good universities who are spending money. It is the private sector's money and they're providing good quality education. So we have seen that in the southern countries, the private sector or philanthropy, they are not coming forward to invest or to spend money on that. So we'll have to motivate that. So at these 4 levels, there can be knowledge partnership and knowledge sharing. So with this, I would like to end.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fahmida. So we have very interesting, very relevant points that have been put forth by our 4 panelists to the second question. Leandro, would you like to go first with this? Leandro, are you there?
Yes. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. So thanks again to the panelists. Very interesting reflection. So this time I'll be very brief. I agree with the colleagues that emphasize the importance of generating equity, being aware of the inequities in the knowledge sector. And again, the pandemic put that in evidence, in the sense that the agenda, the approaches that were highlighted as the way to address the problem, we're mainly looking at countries in the north, and it was very difficult to learn or have access to learn from what other countries in the south were doing, although we were doing excellent things with much less resources. So trying to generate more equitable conditions in knowledge production and knowledge sharing is an important consideration. And the second one I was reflecting of is like there is a role for think tanks and organizations in the academy and also in the civil society to document lessons from these situations and document how governments and stakeholders work together to provide a response to this. But at the same time, I think when we focus on policymakers, decision makers, there was an important aspect of sharing that was not always about training or like written reflections, but I found that it was very important for policymakers to have spaces in which they could came together and share lessons from experience. Just talk, just talk about like what was happening in their countries, in their government, what were the challenges, how like the type of sharing that is different from the most formal knowledge generation. And I think that was also very, very important in this situation. And I think it's sometimes that type of sharing is very valuable and can also both are needed, like more formal training, the more formal knowledge generation, but also more informal spaces to learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Leandro. Dr. Chukupa, are you there?
Yeah, it's a network issue.
Okay. Right. I'm not able to see Dr. Chukuka. As and when he joins us, I think we can request him to bring together the points that the panelists have put together, along with what Leandro has also mentioned, the different takeaways that we have from the panelists. We have about 10 minutes for a quick question answer session. If anyone has any questions among the participants, anyone who's interested in asking a question, most welcome. Otherwise, yes. So one of the so I'll is anyone interested? Has anyone put anything in the chat? Then I can look at that. Right. No, I haven't. I'm not seeing any questions here. I am not very bothered about questions being put up in chat. If anyone has any questions, please can most welcome to raise your hand and ask. Otherwise, I will move on to the last aspect, last component of this panel discussion, where I have requested for a possibility of creating an operative framework which would help guide our development cooperation programs to work towards reducing development inequalities among our countries of the global south. So I'll wait for half a minute. If anyone's interested in asking anything from our panelists or our observers, you are most welcome. Yes, Dr. Annapurna has a very interesting suggestion. The panelists themselves are most welcome to ask questions from each other. If we do not have any other questions from our audience, from our participants, other participants. Right. So as of now, I'm not seeing any questions being asked. So I'll move on to the last kind of bringing together the two questions that we have asked. And if we have to create or kind of strengthen a current operative framework which can work towards bringing countries together towards reducing inequalities, thinking, putting our thinking caps together and working towards an operative framework, what would you envision? So I would like to maybe start again. Vitrina, we all have about 2 to 3 minutes each. Vitrina, would you like to begin? Would you like to share an idea with us?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think my ideas will not be very different from what I earlier said. Basically, we are talking about reducing development inequalities. I can refer to inequalities within countries and inequalities between countries, international inequalities. Between countries, I think the best way to kind of reduce inequality is to make sure that almost, if not everybody in the country can access employment, decent employment.
Right.
Decent income. And that can only happen if the countries can facilitate broad-based growth. For instance, investing in areas that are employment rich. And I mean, for us in Africa, we always talk about, if you look at our Agenda 2063, we talk about structural transformation towards adding to our value to our natural resources that generate employment and to move up the innovation capability later. So that is one way within countries. And internationally, I think this is inequality that is, I find it to be a bit serious, because how can we make, for instance, to develop the country to at least move up, at least to be close to the to some meaningful development in terms of indicators.
Right.
And yes, and I think the same methodology that is used from within countries is the one that can actually even help if, for instance, if countries' government invest in broad-based growth, for instance, in adding value to the natural resources, because most of these countries, for instance, if I talk of countries in Africa, they are very rich in terms of natural resources.
True.
If they can just invest, if they can just invest in value adding to that because value adding is actually kind of, generate employment rather than exporting raw material, that you are exporting employment. So rather than exporting employment, you retain employment in your own country.
True.
And that way, the GDP of countries, even the GDP per capita will increase, and the countries, the inequality will be reduced. So let me, for the time being, these are the most important points that I can say, and this can happen through South-South cooperation. I earlier mentioned that if you read literature, you will find that South-South cooperation actually is far better in terms of kind of reducing inequality, rather than North-South. North-South cooperation is very important, but if it is, for instance, complemented by South-South cooperation,
Right.
then yes, then at least we can be able to address the issues of inequality. And I quickly mentioned that how can that happen, South-South cooperation in terms of trade. I mean, if you can lead to trade within ourselves, for instance,
Right.
we have a free Africa trade, and if it is, then it can be even south. It can be regional. It can be regions within the south, and it's in the southerns. And if we can have foreign investment moving, from one country to the other, that also helps. But most importantly, and I think what is important, maybe what we can take forward here is how can we learn, because all this is about investing in innovation capabilities. Innovation is what matters. I mean, talking
Right.
about development, you have to talk about innovation. How can we
Right.
learn from each other? How
Right.
did the southern countries that are at least up there, how did they made their policies? How did they move with their science, technology, innovation policies? What can we learn? And I think
Right.
we can learn, look at the policies, but we can actually even teach ourselves. We can, there are methodologies of actually designing policies. We can teach ourselves.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Vitrina. That's interesting. Dr. Wakar, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think given that Katrina has really spoken very comprehensively on this point, I'll probably only like to add one point, which is the role of private sector. And the fact that any operative framework will have as one of its key ingredients for sustainability, the financing and funding part. Therein, we have seen that more than the bilateral or multilateral lenders, the private sector foundations have come forward with more certain funding models. So that is something which we need to really explore if we want a reduction in development inequalities to be more sustainable. And these private sector foundations also have to look into collaborating with the private sector in other parts of the world as well. So while we have only seen the private sector foundations from the north coming forward, we also need to see such foundations from the south to come forward as well and form collaboration.
Right, right. That's yes, that's an interesting take. The only question is what could be the pathway? I mean, how do you bring different private organizations together? Because most of the time they are into income generation. So what could be that platform where you bring in these market players to come and talk business with each other, but with the underlying intention of providing social protection or livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods to the people who require them the most. So maybe you could share some points, Wakar, that may
Yes,
come.
so I think this is where the recent literature on social entrepreneurship is so important. And the fact that social enterprises are now gradually getting a legal definition all across the world, not just in northern countries, but people are now, and communities are now starting to see that they are far more sustainable than the traditional NGO or NPO model, for example. And and I think in countries such as Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, for example, we have seen recent efforts to give a legal definition to social entrepreneurship, which will not only promote this enterprise, but allow more funding and finance to come into such community-based social enterprises.
Great. That's a very interesting point. And that's something that is easily shareable between and among countries of the global south. Right, right.
And
Thank you. That was interesting. Karen, would you like to share your ideas on an operative framework?
Sure. I mean, of course, in principle, an operative framework is necessary, and the gaps that are getting highlighted about no information, can't really talk about impact, will go away if there is an operative framework and there is an M&E function. But from what I have been reading about South-South cooperation and with the kinds of ways in which the cooperation frameworks are written, this is really something that countries are resisting. So it's necessary, but how do you put something in place that is going to satisfy the needs? So the one argument is that what is South-South cooperation is so diverse. That is from trade to infrastructure to capacity, that it can incorporate all sorts of things which goes beyond ODA, that it would need its own frameworks and that countries need to have control of this, whereas ODA works in a more different structured format. So how do we put one in place that works for all these different issues is what is going to be troublesome. So some of the ideas are that at least there has to be some principles. At least there has to be this set of things that says it's on these issues that we think South-South cooperation should really move faster, prioritize. So things like, what is happening with poor, or how do we help build resilience? Is there certain, and then trade is a big part of South-South cooperation actually, but trade for whom? Can there be a few principles added that they have to stick to? And it could be and accountability, things like accountability and transparency. Also, I suppose these are the ones that are also very difficult to get consensus on, because it means that you have to be clear about your intentions and who really benefits.
Right.
So this is where there is more struggle, and of course the fact that within countries also that this information must be available as widely as possible. And we do have to overcome our challenges of data and accessibility if we really want to make the system function better, make taxpayers' money work better.
Right.
The other aspect is also that there have been initiatives actually that have been trying to pull out indicators that would help us put it into a framework that helps us manage it better.
Right.
But then again, I think the indicators would also have to be a group of indicators that for everything you don't have to do all the indicators, but based, like there is some sort of like a criteria that is being placed.
Right.
Of course, as an academic exercise, we can say this can be done. Getting political buy-in for something like this is going to be a completely different ball
That's
game.
a different ball game altogether.
Yeah. So yeah, in principles, of course, it is necessary. The issue is about how do you make one that it's not going to be one that works for all situations, but can there be some uniformity, some principles that are said, at least these are the guiding principles within which they need to happen.
Right, right.
So
Thank you.
that is my thought.
Thank you, Karen. I mean, kind of trying to bring those points together under a common umbrella of, guiding principles, and then having them theme-based and having countries prioritize their guiding principles on the basis of that framework. That's interesting, right? Thank you. Dr. Fahmida? Dr. Fahmida, are you there? I don't see. Sorry, I think
she's.
Yeah, I don't see her. Maybe we'll come back to her because she's put across some points. Maybe she can also bring those points together. If not, then I also don't see Dr. Chukuka. So, oh, okay. Leandro, would you like to kind of bring these points together? We can bring in Dr. Fahmida later, but if you have any ideas in terms of all these points that they have put together, how do we kind of bring them under an operative framework? Because I know that that's also one of your strong points, Leandro. So how would you advise us to bring these points together under a common framework?
Yes. Well, I have to be honest and say that in principle it sounds like a very ambitious and a complicated endeavor to develop such a framework, because
Right.
my understanding is that if we're tackling this complex issue of development inequalities, we need all stakeholders involved and in capacity to bring their own perspectives. Otherwise, any reflection on development inequalities that is not is inclusive will continue replicating the existing inequalities. So finding a way to bring together diverse stakeholders from different regions, countries, backgrounds sounds like a very challenge. For sure, there might be some organizations or actors that have the legitimacy to coordinate that effort. Or also, an idea I was thinking is that there may be efforts at the national level or even regional level, and then that can be bring together in a more international arena.
Right.
So I think that's my reflection, that it's ambitious, it's challenging, and in any case it has to be participatory and inclusive and aware of the need to involve different, especially different vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Would you can you maybe suggest maybe the points that these panelists have put together? Are there any themes under which I could kind of slot them to be able to arrive at how do we kind of share knowledge, have this development cooperation in place in case I would like to, let's say, present this to UNO SSC, as let's say that they already have this framework, but what could I suggest to them that they could add? Would you have any ideas, Leandro?
Okay, I don't really know which framework are you talking about that they already have.
Okay.
I think I will need to look at it and see what are the gaps that I identified and make recommendations. But the colleagues have already shared some ideas.
Yes.
And, I will stress the fact or the issue of participation and inclusion in
right.
In this consultation. Sorry, that's all I can say at this point.
Right. Great. All right. Thank you. So this brings us to a very interesting discussion that we have had. Our panelists have brought in very interesting perspectives, which I hope will be we at PAC would be able to bring our thoughts together, kind of work towards something that we would like to put up in our report while sharing. I will definitely share this report with all of us, all the participants, panelists, and observers. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Dr. Annapurna has a special request. Dr. Annapurna.
Please turn on the video, everyone. I would like to take a quick photograph.
Yes, so her request is for all of us to come on video. She would like to take a photograph of all of us. So can I request all participants to come on video, please? Right. Thank you. Yes. 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 So yes, thank you. I mean, yes, everyone, please, can you please come on video? Yes, yes, they are all here. Here.
Oh. Smile, smile, everyone. Be happy.
Either? Oh. Is everyone here? So let me take a quick pic so that we can add this to the report. Thank you. Thank you so much for participating. This has been a wonderful exercise. We'll definitely have, we do have everyone's email ID. We'll share this report with all of you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, all the resource persons.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
we-
Bye-bye.
you all also, but
Right.
it's really been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't go off. You can keep it.